Welcome to the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, silly, strange, and sublime aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men, who are the go-to parent, aren't always accepted at work, among their friends, or in the community for what they're doing. I'm your host, Paul Sullivan. Our podcast is just one of the many things we produce each week at the Company of Dads. We have various features, including the Lead Dad of the Week. We have our community, both online and in person. And we have a new resource library for all fathers. The one-stop shop for all of this is our newsletter, The Dad. So sign up today at thecompanyofdads.com/The Dad. Today, my guest is Michael Frerichs, Treasurer of the state of Illinois. He won election to this position in 2014 and has been reelected twice. Before this, he was a state senator, and earlier he ran his own technology company, which is a fascinating story that we'll get into toward the end. He grew up in a farming town in the southern part of Illinois. The treasurer has 3 children, a 14-year-old daughter, and newborn twins. What piqued my interest in talking to him was an opinion piece he wrote in the Daily Herald, a suburban Chicago newspaper. It was called "Supporting Women in Their Careers Sometimes Requires a Big Move." We'll get into what that means in a moment. Treasurer, welcome to the Company of Dads podcast.
Oh, happy to be here.
What's a workday look like for you?
Every workday is different. This morning, it's a work from home. I've been doing a lot more of that lately with the twins. My wife needs a little more help around the house. We don't have a nanny yet. But then there are days like tomorrow where I'll get in the car early. I'll drive down to Bloomington, Illinois, then to Springfield and back up. There are days like last week where I'm at a national conference of state treasurers out of state. There are days where I am running around. Like this weekend, I took the boys with me to a parade in Chinatown for the Taiwanese community. We went out to a political event. Yesterday, I was marching in the Columbus Day Parade yesterday morning. So there is no typical day as a state treasurer.
All right, fair enough. You know, in the opinion piece that piqued my curiosity, you wrote about moving from Champaign County, where you'd been a state senator and where you'd grown up, to Chicago, where your wife Erica works for Kellogg, the cereal company. It's a 2-hour move, but a world of change. And so, how did that conversation start for you to decide to make that move?
Well, we can go back a ways. So I was married once before. Like a lot of people, I didn't get marriage right the first time. But during the pandemic, I met my now wife. She was living in Chicago. I would be up in Chicago a fair amount because I have an office up there in addition to our capital in Springfield. Mm-hmm. And we would commute back and forth. You know, she'd come down to Champaign for a week. I'd go to Chicago for a week because I still was raising my daughter from my first marriage. We had 50-50 custody, a week on, a week off. And I told my current wife, I said, like, look, if this is going to work, you're not going to see me a lot. I am down at home with my daughter 1 week out of every 2. Yeah. And so that's okay. I'm flexible, or I can come join you. And we were going to continue to do that. It was only a 2.5 hour drive. But when we found out we got married and found out we were going to have twins, we realized packing up 2 newborns and all the equipment with them and getting to a car and driving 2.5 hours while they may or may not sleep was not going to work. And that prompted the discussion of where do we want to consolidate our household?
Yeah. And tell us, why did you pick Chicago? What was it about, moving there from where you'd been before that worked best for your family?
Well, I'd say that one of the great things about being a state treasurer is I can live anywhere I want as long as it's within the state borders.
So if you go to Indiana, that's a no-no. You can't.
That'd be a no-no. I would lose my job if I were to do that. Quite frankly, I wouldn't vote for myself. But I could live where I wanted to, but I wanted to stay in Champaign County. I wanted to stay there because my daughter was there. She liked the community. My parents are there. My older brother still is in the town I grew up in. My younger brother lives in a small town near Champaign. So I had a great support network there. My parents are retired. My mom was very active in raising her granddaughter. My wife has a much smaller family. They're a little more spread out, and her mother is still working. So we talked about moving to Champaign. She reached out to her employer and said, hey, at the pandemic, a lot of people working remotely. I was wondering, would it be okay if I worked remotely from Champaign? And they talked about it and got back to her and said, yeah, not a problem. You can work from Champaign. Now, you'll take a cut in pay. You
Mm.
will move off the executive track. We'll find a job for you that you can do remotely working from Champaign, but you're going to give up the career path you've been on. And my wife, to her credit, said, hey, for our family, I'm willing to make that sacrifice. And I had to do some soul searching. As much as I
Yeah.
liked living in Champaign, as much as there were benefits of living near my family, I could still do my job, and my job didn't require any real sacrifice for moving up to Chicago. And that's how we made that decision.
It's it's a great story because when you think, historically, so many women have been saddled with the label, trailing spouse. They've followed along as their husband has been promoted. And here you were able to sort of lean in and figure out that you do have this flexibility, even though you say, you could work anywhere in the state, you had roots in Champaign. And you decided to move, which is commendable. But was there a response in the state treasurer's office, or like, thank God he's finally getting farther away, or we can't let him go this far, we're going to miss him? Or did the Chicago office say, oh no, he's going to be here all the time? I mean, jokes aside, how did that work, for you as an elected state official to say, okay, I'm going to, move homes?
It's funny because I tell people that I'm the boss, and that I also simultaneously have 13 million bosses.
Right.
I get to keep my job as a result of the people of the state giving it to me. But the people who work in the treasurer's office, they don't have to go to those 13 million people to keep their jobs. They go to me. So I don't hear a lot of complaining in my office, whether they like it or not. But the complaints I heard was from a reporter, a columnist, in my local newspaper. No secret, he had a different political philosophy than me. He had been critical of my time in the state Senate before, and he wrote a parting shot at me when he found out I was moving to Chicago, and denigrated the area that I grew up in. Said that Mike Frerichs is leaving the rubes and the hayseeds of northern Champaign County behind to go to the big city of Chicago to pursue his big political ambitions. Well, that was offensive to the people I grew up around, my family around the area. It was completely wrong in terms of my motivations for doing this. As I pointed out, I have been elected statewide 3 times while living in downstate Illinois. I didn't need to move to Chicago to get elected statewide. I moved for my wife, but I think there are certain men out there who believe that men make decisions for their families and their wives follow them. Mm-hmm. So I explained in an op-ed counter reply to him that, look, Jim, my wife has a good job. My wife's job isn't as flexible as mine. I chose to give up my hometown, connections to be close to my family and my friends, to allow my wife to continue in her career. And I think there's some men that just couldn't understand that. Mm-hmm. But Paul, do you know who did understand that? Women. I got lots of calls, lots of emails, people stopping me and saying, thank you very much. Thank you for pointing out that men can also make sacrifices for their wives' careers. One woman in particular reached out to me. I knew her, but didn't know her well. And she said, I remember my husband and I were living in different cities. And when I got pregnant, just everyone asked me, when are you moving to his city? And her response was, why would I move to his city? I've got the better job. I had better income. Why did no one ask him when he was going to be moved to be closer to his wife and his child? And so she encouraged me. She said, this is great. We need to have this dialogue. And that's what grew into the op-ed that you read in the Daily Herald. I figured, like I heard from the people, this was a conversation we ought to be having.
Yeah. Obviously we agree 100% with what you're saying. I mean, this is the genesis of the Company of Dads. I mean, I was a longtime New York Times columnist. I loved it. But my wife, when she started her own firm, she didn't have as much control over her time as I did. And so I stepped up, and this is 10 years ago now, to be the lead dad. But at the time, I wasn't a public figure as you are. I wasn't in a position where I would, talk about it openly. And it wasn't until COVID where I, fortunate enough to be the type of person who was able to work remotely, where I said, this is going to change. The way we work is going to change, one. And then the second thing I said, there must be a community for guys like me. Like I'm not a stay-at-home dad, nothing wrong with that. But I'm not also a guy who sort of, outsources all the care of his children and family to someone else. I'm somebody who's made a lot of decisions by having difficult conversations with my wife. Not all difficult, some, inspiring. And I've got 3 daughters. So I want to, set an example for them. And that was really the genesis of the Company of Dads. But, one of the other things we do is we spend a lot of time talking to companies, and it's very binary. Like some companies 100% get what we're doing, and they see this as a benefit to working moms, to women. It's not just men getting another benefit. It's, men stepping up and being full parents, men stepping up and being lead dads is good for them, but it's also really good for working moms because suddenly the burden isn't entirely on them for caregiving responsibilities. And it shows other people, that this can be done. So in your position, and I know you joke that, you're the boss, and you certainly are the boss as a treasurer, but how is it the way you've worked and interacted with, your office? I assume your main office is in Springfield, the state capital, but how has that, changed? Were you working remotely before? Have you had different conversations with certain people who work, for you or with you after making this move?
Before the pandemic, I was living in Champaign. I was about an hour and 20-minute drive to Springfield, our state capital, and about a 2-hour drive from our main office in Chicago. Most of our employees are in Springfield, but responsibilities are separated, and most of my constituents live in the Chicago area. So I was splitting my time between those 2 cities. I would drive into Springfield and work for the day, or would spend the night there in my apartment, or would drive into Chicago and the same thing. The pandemic taught us that we could work remotely much more easily and effectively. I knew that we could do conference calls, but I also knew they weren't nearly as effective. You couldn't see people's faces if they couldn't see what you were doing. So yeah, this probably means less time in my Springfield office, but it doesn't mean they don't see me as much. They'll see me like this. They will talk to me on the phone, they'll see emails, and the pandemic really sort of allowed us to step up and move to Chicago and spend more time.
And how long ago was the move? It's fairly recent, or?
So I think we bought the house in May. I sold my house in Champaign in July. So
Okay.
It's now officially been a couple of months that I have not been a Champaign resident.
When I talk to sort of C-suite leaders who are men who have taken on this lead dad role, at first they're not quite sure what the impact is going to be beyond their own family. They know what the impact is going to be on their life. They know what the impact is going to be on their spouse and their children, but they don't really think beyond what it might be in the workforce. And so many of them have come back to me and said, this has been so positive for the people who report to me because I've set an example and I've shown them that this is possible. It's possible for a senior leader who's a man to take on this caregiving role. And that's opened it up for other men, but it's also opened it up for other working moms. Have you seen any indication of that in the treasurer's office?
So funny you asked that. Let me go back a little bit and say that, this is not although it's a recent move from Champaign to Chicago, this isn't a recent change in me as a father. As I mentioned, I was married once before. My daughter was from my ex-wife. We got divorced about 11 years or so ago, and I wouldn't say it was a contentious divorce. We agreed that our daughter was our primary responsibility. We agreed on 50-50 custody, but we reached that agreement at one point. My wife said, "You are too busy. You're on the road too much. You can't be a full-time dad. You can't have her 50% of the time." I fought, and I said, no, I will make this work. And she said, "Well, you're gone too much." And I said, "I will make this work." And so when I came in as treasurer, I told my scheduling team off the start, I have my daughter half the nights. On the nights I have my daughter, you'll know when they are, do not schedule me for things. Do not schedule me to be on the road. I have to be home with her. The nights that I don't have her, you can send me anywhere you want. Anywhere you want around the state, anywhere you want around the country, that's fine. That's my time to work long hours. And so we set a standard very early of blocking out family time for me to be a dad. And so basically, I was not a stay-at-home dad. I wasn't a single father, but half the nights I was a single father responsible for my daughter. And we established that very early. Now, I like how you came to this path and talking about this, because clearly you weren't alone. I did have someone on my staff who was a new father. And after maybe 3 or 4 months, he said, "Treasurer, this being a dad is tough. Kids cry. He's like, how do you do this? And I said, well, we make it work. There are sacrifices, but they're worth it. He said, because I bet people would really appreciate hearing that about you, seeing that side of you. And I said, that's fine, but my personal life is my personal life. I don't talk about that here. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm not looking for them to think that I'm a martyr. This is my life. Other people have their own lives. But I think after I opened up about my issues regarding moving to Chicago with my wife, I was surprised at the response I received. I mean, people reaching out, people talking to me on the street, or at events, people coming and pulling me aside and saying, well, thank you. And I kind of made the decision that I'm going to talk a little more about my personal life because, I think there are people out there who have gone through similar circumstances to me, who might learn from, who might take something from this. And so I think that's why I responded so quickly to your offer invitation to come on your podcast.
I also have a 14-year-old daughter. I've got 3 daughters, are 14, 11, and 6. How has she fared with the move to Chicago? I'm presuming, is she in 9th grade now? Is this her first year of high school?
In the freshman year.
Yeah. So how has that gone for her?
So after just telling you, Paul, how now I am sharing more about myself.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah.
It's a tough conversation to have because she's 14 years old. She's a freshman in high school. I don't think she likes having a public life, but some of the details are public out there. Her mother got remarried last year as well to someone who lived in Chicago. She was graduating 8th grade, and her 8th grade class, the kids from that class were going to kind of 8 different high schools.
Right.
So her friend groups were going to be splintered anyway. And we figured this was the right time. If she was going to move, if she's going to start at a new high school, might as well do it now. You're not pulling her away from her friends. Her friends are going different directions anyway. I think that she has done well. She's a resilient, bright kid, but she's a 14-year-old girl. And there are just a lot of issues there that I either don't understand or I have to think back how it was. She didn't know anyone at this school. She has made friends, but I think she has not made lifelong friends immediately. She remembers, hey, those friends from Champaign were my better friends. I've had to tell her that, there's one thing about friendships is they don't happen overnight. You can't buy them. You can't force them.
Mm-hmm.
They take time to grow and develop, and they will happen. And so I think she's doing well, but like all high school kids, there's a lot of awkwardness and uncertainty.
You come across as much like I am, which is a person wired for optimism. And I'm wondering though, when you set out to move, I mean, you're not just, you're in the state of Illinois, but you're not just moving one town to another. You're not just moving from a rural town to a big city. You're moving from the place where you had your roots, where your family is, your brother, your buddies who certainly don't call you treasurer because they've known you since you were in high school. They call you all kinds of other things.
If they call me treasurer, they call it ironically.
100% ironically. Yeah, exactly. What's been some of, for other, men listening to this, for other working moms listening to this, what have been some of the unexpected challenges? And I know it's still early days, but what have been some of the unexpected challenges of making this move? And I don't want to say it's for your wife. The move was for your family. It was a family move, but making this family move and how you had to balance, friendships, connections, and of course, work and your constituents.
It's a tough one to answer, and it's a tough one to really understand, because not only did I make the move, I made the move at the same time my wife gave birth to twins. So my life has been upended in 2 different ways.
You just have so much free time now, you don't know what to do with yourself, is what you're saying.
Exactly. My brother came up to visit this weekend, brought his wife and my niece and nephew along. They wanted to spend time with their cousins, and we had a great weekend together. My brother and I had a little bit of time together, and he said, so how do you like the big city? I'm like, I don't know, Kevin. I don't feel like it's a big change. What do you mean? It's clearly a big change. I said, yeah. My life is frequently stuck inside this house.
Yeah.
We'll take the kids out occasionally, and yes, I'll go out and stuff. But even if I had stayed put in Champaign, my life would have been disrupted by twins. My time with those buddies would have been severely curtailed by twins. And, normally if you move to a new city, you think, let's get out. Let's explore the nightlife. Let's explore new restaurants. But when you have twins at home or you have twins in the NICU, you're not really going out over the summer and enjoying all that Chicago has to offer. I feel like I have gotten to know my neighborhood, where we walk the dog and we take the boys and stroller rides in the neighborhood, really well. Outside of that neighborhood, I'm hoping someday that I will spend more time exploring.
I love it. I can hear your, Chicago neighbor saying, I don't know. He says he's the treasurer, but he's just kind of a hermit. Like they go in and out, and we don't see a whole lot of them.
They do see me out. We had a block party in September.
That's wonderful.
And I got up and said, "Oh, hey, you're new to the neighborhood. We've seen you or your wife walking the dog, or what do you do?" And I said, "Well, if you vote, you either voted for or against me. When I'm at home, when I'm in my neighborhood, I am a neighbor. I am not a title. I'm not my office. I'm just a neighbor like everyone else. And I think that's either how people see me or it's how they choose to address me. Right. But it's been a great move that way."
This is a wonderful conversation. Just a couple more questions, but one here, I want to, put you in the sort of way back machine. If you think back to the technology company you started, and you explained to me off air that it was a technology company that monitored the structural integrity of bridges. If you think back to, the Michael, not the treasurer, but the Michael that you were there when you were running that company, what are the biggest differences between how Michael ran that company as it related to caregivers and working parents, and how treasurer fulfills his role and thinks about, the responsibilities he has? What is that sort of arc of growth in your own life as you've looked at, caregivers as you've moved on in your career?
Wow. So many changes. One, I was single, not married, had no kids at the time. So working crazy hours wasn't a problem. It was a different place in my life, a very different thing. And then two, here, once again, the dichotomy. I'm the boss of the company. I'm subservient to a board of directors of 13 million people. There, I was nominally the boss, but I had investors who were very engaged and very active. And so in some ways, I didn't feel like the boss there. There was a big challenge. It was clear the nation has a problem with our bridges. Our infrastructure is deficient. We thought we had a solution out there. We worked multiple angles to get people to adopt it. Who loved our company, Paul? Engineers.
Sure.
Engineers loved all the data we were going to give them. Who didn't love our company? Lawyers. For the state. Hated it. You know what all that data is? That is something that is foiable. It is admissible. Sure. If there's a problem with the bridge, the defense attorney, the attorneys suing the state, are going to request that, and they're going to comb through it, and they're going to say, like, look, you had reason to believe 1 week in advance there was a problem with the bridge, and you didn't post it. You now are more liable. And so that was one of the problems we had. I like solving problems. If people read my bio, they'll see that I spent my summers in Eastern Europe in college. I graduated, moved to Taiwan, where I studied Chinese and taught English. I worked as a paralegal in New York for a little while. I came back home, started an engineering company, was a county auditor, a state senator, and asked, what's the logic? What's the direction in that path? And I'll say, really the thing that tied them all together is they were all challenges, and they were all things that interested me. And I find that if you do things that interest you, you will show up to work early. You will leave work late. You will ask to help out other people because you love your work. And that if you do things that don't come easy to you, they're a challenge, you will grow and improve a lot faster. You will fail, but you will learn from those failures faster than you will taking the easy route. I like to remind young people when they ask for career advice, I just say, you do what interests you. I can't tell you what you should do, but I will tell you if you do something that does not challenge you, it will not change you.
Mm-hmm. That's a good segue into this question, because you trying to solve problems, complex problems. You use your office as treasurer to go beyond some of the typical things that a state treasurer would do. You've helped disabled people. You've helped people save money for college. These are very important programs. Is it too far beyond the purview of the office of state treasurer to sort of wade into the issue around caregiving and how people save and fund, caregiving, at least in the state of Illinois, if not in the country more broadly?
That is a great question. I'll tell you two things. One, I like to tell people the job I have today is not the job I ran for. And they'll scratch their head. Well, how can that be? So, because the job I ran for wasn't in charge of retirement savings programs. It didn't invest in infrastructure. It didn't help families with disabilities save. It didn't help with refinancing student debt. These are all things that we have done and created in our office. Because when I came in, I had all these questions like, hey, how can we help out this problem? And my lawyers, get back to those lawyers, would say, well, Trish, you can't do that. Why can't I do that? Well, because it's prohibited by state law, or state law doesn't explicitly ask you to or give you permission to do this. And I said, well, great, the answer is easy. As a former legislator, let's just change the law. And so the question you ask is something I've been thinking a lot about lately. Because we try and do is solve problems that make an impact on people's lives. In politics, you find lots of just fighting going on, fighting over hot button issues or so. And a lot of it to me seems like posturing. What I try and figure out is what really makes a difference in people's lives? What are people worried about? And in survey after survey, if you ask what people's top concerns are, they are, will I be able to give my child a better future than I have had? Mm-hmm. Will I be able to have retirement and enjoy my golden years? Because too many Americans have not saved enough. They're not prepared for retirement. And then their other concern regards healthcare / childcare. And so with colleges, we have an answer. We have a couple of answers. We help people save for their kids going to college, and we help them with student debt. In terms of retirement, we set up a retirement savings program. But it's that third concern that the treasurer doesn't have an explicit role in, but we are looking at and exploring ways we might be able to help families save for childcare or to help out with healthcare costs. One of the other big concerns for families.
Wonderful.
So we don't answer yet, but we're working.
But you're working on it. I love it. Thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, Treasurer Michael Frerichs from the state of Illinois. Thank you for joining me today on the Company of Dads podcast. One final question. We try not to ever make this political, but this is a political question in Chicago right now. Cubs or White Sox?
I know you're not supposed to choose sides or offend anyone, but my loyalties are pretty clear. I'm a Cubs fan. I've been a Cubs fan since day 2. And that gets to a story of my dad. To show you how things have changed. The day after I was born, my dad grew up on a farm. He was born on the farm. Doctor came out to the farm, he was born, and he grew up with very traditional ideas of fatherhood. The man goes out and works hard in the field. The woman raises the kids. So when I was 1 day old, Dad thought, this ain't my job. He went to go watch the Cubs play a game in Chicago. Drove 2.5 hours.
He drove to Chicago. He didn't watch it on TV. He drove to Chicago to see the game. Fantastic.
He had a good time, by all accounts. He came back down on my second full day alive. My mom, I was born cesarean section. My mom got an infection. She couldn't hold me. And even then, in the early 1970s, doctors knew that there's some value of like skin to skin between babies and parents. My dad was very much not into raising children. My dad never changed a diaper in his life. He had a great dad. That wasn't how he was raised.
Yeah.
The doctor goes to my dad and says, Jim, would you like to hold your new son? And my dad looked at him and said, well, can I watch the game while I hold him? And the doctor said, sure you can. So at day 2, my dad held me while he watched the Chicago Cubs on TV. And that's why I say I've been a Cubs fan since day 2.
Treasurer, fantastic way to end. Thank you again for your time today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Okay. Paul, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Company of Dads podcast. I also want to thank the people who make this podcast and everything else that we do at the Company of Dads possible. Helder Mira, who is our audio producer. Lindsay Decker, who handles all of our social media. Terry Brennan, who's helping us with the newsletter and audience acquisition. Emily Servin, who is our web maestro. And of course, Evan Roosevelt, who is working side by side with me in many of the things that we do here at the Company of Dads. It's a great team, and we're just trying to bring you the best in fatherhood. Remember, the one-stop shop for everything is our newsletter, The Dad. Sign up at thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. Thank you again for listening.